Hello. Welcome to this episode of Musically Cogitating, a podcast about the relevance and importance of living in contemporary music of all kinds and about how that music impacts our everyday lives. I am your favorite podcast host, Ciyadh Wells. Thank you so much for joining me here today. As always, any relevant and important links are in the show notes. And ding, 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 ding. The show has now surpassed more than 750 individual downloads. And that is a really big deal to me because I never thought this many people were listening to the show that many times. And so it's really awesome. And I'm really grateful that you all have been on this podcasting journey with me and that you're willing to listen to me and my guests talk about music and kind of, music adjacent things. And so I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who also reached out to me after the last episode and had some really positive things to say. When you're doing a solo podcast, you're never really sure how things are going to land or resonate with people. And so it's good to know that, in fact, you all are listening and that you're enjoying it and that it does resonate with you. So if you have feedback, positive or negative / constructive feedback for me about the show, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can send me an email, you can comment on a picture, you can send me a DM anywhere, kind of where I am, mostly Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, get in touch. If you're also interested in being on the show, that's also a way to get in touch with me. I would love to talk to anyone about music and art and about how, those two things kind of impact our everyday lives, as I always like to say. Today we're going to continue with this series on career exploration, and this will be the third installment in that series. And today we're going to focus on performing, and similar to the last episode, these are just going to be some thoughts on what my life has been like as a performer, which I've talked about many times, but this is really really narrowed in on performing. And also just some other thoughts that I have about what it means to be a performer, who can or cannot be considered a performer, and all of those types of things. There are so many different ways that performing happens, or there's so much that is involved with performing that is really beautiful and that is kind of visible. But on the flip side of that, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what it means to be a performer, and especially the idea of music and art being professionalized. And there are some preconceived notions out there that I kind of just want to talk about, and I think that are really important to me. It's something I'm always thinking about. And so that is, part of what I want to share with you today. Similar to teaching, performing is such a visible part of art making. It's because, not all the time, but oftentimes when we're performing, we're doing it for people, and it's really visible. And we all have a lot of thoughts about it. We have thoughts about, is this thing that I'm watching or listening to, is this song entertaining? Is it bad to be someone who entertains? Which is probably a whole separate topic in itself, right? Like the process of understanding art as entertainment and art as something entirely different. So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today, is just performing, being a performer, what it means to be a performer, and all that. In true fashion of the show, I'm going to start with kind of how I define what it means to be a performer, and also the act and the art of performing. And performing for me is the intentional act of making a thing. In this case, I'm going to refer to making music, and sometimes I might say art, but so I'm using art and music interchangeably here. But that's my really simple definition. It's simple. There's no frills. If you start thinking about doing something, about making music, about making art, and the intention is there that you'll make the thing, then that is performing to me. Performing doesn't imply the presence of an audience, although for some it may. Some people will say, it's not a performance if someone didn't see it. It's like that meme that used to be out. It's like, take pics or it didn't happen, which I totally still say to people sometimes. But, performing is not that. Someone can have performed something and it been a really beautiful and intimate thing, and there are no pics, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, or maybe no one was really present. But again, that doesn't mean to me that it is not a performance. For me, it's the making of the music as an intentional, informational, informative space to make art that makes it performing. A performer is the person who, of course, in this case, makes the music or the art. And now we live in a time and an age where some people might call this person a creator. And that might be great for them. I don't always refer to myself as a creator. It's not something that I really identify with all the time, although sometimes I totally have. But that's just me. I like to often refer to myself in the context of the thing that I am making. So, I make music as a guitarist. I write blogs, which you should check out, the podcast blog and my personal blog. I make podcasts, so I'm a podcaster. But some people will say, all of that is content. And I was listening to another podcast, of course, before this, and they were saying that they feel as though the term kind of content creator muddles what art is, and what they were saying is it kind of simplifies or takes away the importance of having called something music, and it makes it less important because you've called it content. It makes it less intentional because you've called it content. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I like to think of the performer as the person who gets up there with the intention of sharing, of making the thing, of making the art, of, in some cases, being entertaining, but not always. But some people, like I said, will call performers creators and use them interchangeably. Performers sometimes perform for others, and sometimes they perform for themselves. And I truly believe that anyone can be a performer. You can be trained to be a performer, to make art, to share it, to live in it, to have it in the world, for it to be in this space. And I don't really believe that as a performer it needs to be based in anything other than that. I don't think you have to classify a performer based on their level, how long they've been practicing their art, how hard they've worked, or anything like that. I think if you make the thing and you share it, even if it's just that you share it with yourself or your cat, then to me you're a performer, and you're a performer who performs their art. And this all sort of goes back into, again, how people call themselves musicians, and everyone defines that differently. And I think we need to be more accepting of how people define that. So that'll also be something that I talk about here and anywhere else that I talk about this subject. But there are kind of like two groups of thinking that I've noticed. There are surely more, but group one kind of thinks that in order to call yourself a musician, you have to have studied for X number of years with X professor at X institution, and or have spent 10,000 hours which is what they say is going to make you like really great at your art. Or you have to have been self-taught, but somehow you suddenly became a musical genius. And then group 2 thinks that if you make music, you can call yourself a musician, which again is where I fall. And I think, whatever matters to you is how you can define it. But this again is just how I'm kind of always thinking about things. And it took me a long time. I was on a really personal journey to understand and to help myself to define how and what it means to be a musician. And some people will say the opposite. They'll say like these two camps or these two groups of people don't really exist. It's not really like that. And that's totally fine. This is just my perspective. We should all think differently about this. And hopefully we're all able to get to a place where we continue to respect and acknowledge our differences of opinion about this particular topic. My journey to being a performer, I detailed it in the second episode of the podcast, which will be linked, but I talked about it like in really, really great detail. But I've been performing since a young age, and since then, all I've really wanted to do was to make art. And sometimes I do that in front of people. And in the last year, I've kind of learned that sometimes I can take or leave the people part, like the doing it in front of people. But yes, the audience is important. And I do want to make music for people and in front of people again, because that's the relationship with the audience is an important part of that. And so, I really meandered my way around in music until I found the guitar, and I've kind of stuck with that. And early on, I just knew that I wanted to do that. And so I pursued that in the best way that I knew how. And the way that I did that and continue to do that, I think has worked for me, but that of course isn't the only way. And I wish that, in big C, in capital C classical music, where I spend a lot of time, I wish that more people would talk about this. Like, not everyone who plays in an orchestra or chamber group or insert classical ensemble type here has gone to music school or studied with that special person or heard all of these symphonies or memorized every part of all of those symphonies that they should have heard, or is great at reading music. Although, and sure, you can say like those things are kind of part of the job, and it is, but also in music and art, like we create the job, so it really doesn't have to be part of the job unless we make it, and we've made it purposefully that way, probably to be prohibitive, to leave people out, to keep people marginalized. And so classical music doesn't have to be that way. A lot of art isn't that way, but a lot of art is that way. And the journey to getting to where I am, to where you are, if you are an artist, or where you see people who are artists, is all very different. And we put so much time and energy into deciding, what is our path going to be to performance? Who will we study with, or where will we go to college? And yes, if you want to do those things and that's important to you in the moment, then yeah, people will read your bio and they'll think maybe a certain thing of you that you went to a certain school. And then there are going to be people who read your same bio and have no idea who or what any of that means, and it won't matter to them, and that's totally fine too. So it's really up to you to determine how you feel and how you see that from your perspective as a performer, but also as someone who consumes the art. But the journey is what's most important. Deciding that at a really young age I was going to pursue music, whether that meant that I was going to be like the only thing I pursued, or that it was going to be something that I pursued in addition to, was really important to me. And it was a journey, and I'm always going to be on that journey as a performer, as someone who performs for people in public. And everyone's journey is different. So, you'll see someone, and sure, this still happens to all of us, kind of, we're like, oh, I'm jealous of that person because they went to X and Y school. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. And unfortunately, people do take into account pedigree and like this weird lineage thing that people have in classical music. Like, side note, I was talking to someone yesterday, and they said that they knew people who had tried to trace their musical lineage or heritage back to Beethoven, and that's so weird. Like, no one really cares. And so again, we're all on this journey, and it's hard not to get caught up in that. But at the end of the day, right, the most important thing is that we've made good art. Good being good to the person who may or may not, be listening. And it'll be good to you. What may be good to you, it might not be good to me. Totally fine. I want to now talk about the professionalization of a music performing career. And for many years, I've worked really hard, or did what I thought I needed to do to become or to be considered a professional musician by the standards of myself and what I've been taught, and also by that of others. And there are no hard and fast definitions on this again, but some will say that in order to be considered a professional musician, that if you make any kind of income from any kind of gig or show or performance of whatever, it could be a $10 type of gig, anything, money is money, and that makes you a professional. Some will say that a certain percentage of your income makes you a professional. Some will say it's how often you're performing is what makes you a professional. And some will say it doesn't matter, none of that matters. You don't get to be called a professional until I call you one. And I being, whoever is thinking that. Some say it's about how good you play, or what does your sound like, or any number of things that make you professional. There's also this idea that some people are what they call like semi-pro. And I don't really use the term semi-pro to define like if someone's a pro or not. It's just how it is. And some people will say like, well, you're not a pro until you're done studying with X person. And again, I think that's a really poor way to define what it means to be a professional. And I notice that a lot in the classical world, and this idea of like needing to define someone as a professional. There's this constant need for people to do that, and for people to be able to describe themselves. And it's because people want to have arrived, right? Like, some people have been working since they were 4 years old, and they wanted to be a professional musician since then, and their parents did. And so they did everything that they possibly could in their power to make sure that when they grew up, they were going to be a classical musician. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we spend so much time putting and asserting those labels on other people, and I don't think that that's really a healthy way for our community to be and continue. And I don't think it's a way for people maybe who aren't a part of our community but who are really moved and entertained by what we do either. And I think for me, it's the idea and the intention that being a professional musician just means that you want to, you enjoy it. It's much more to you than something that you do every once in a while that you don't really pursue in any sort of kind of formal way. And it's really difficult in the classical music community, and I think in the music community in general, because there's this idea that being a professional means that you're able to play or do certain things and that you sound a certain way. And then when you don't, people will say like, you're not a good professional. They'll talk poorly about you. They will not give you any gigs. They will essentially attempt to revoke your professional card. And I don't think that is good. I don't really care what other people think, and I don't care to define it for other people either. So it's like, people ask me, are you a full-time artist? And I feel like I make art full-time, so I'm going to say yes, even though the majority of my income is from a music adjacent job, I guess is what you can call it. I still aspire to make more money, to be able to continue to feed myself and my family from art and from performing primarily. But I really enjoy the things that I do as well, so it's totally okay for me. In a perfect world, yeah, we would, all of us who aspire to make all of our income from performing would be able to do so, but we don't live in a perfect world, and I am pretty content with all of the avenues by which I've chosen to make money. Deciding that you don't want to earn money from a career in music, though, doesn't mean that you don't have a career. It doesn't mean that you aren't professional. If you are considered a pro, then you are. And there are going to be people who don't acknowledge that, which is terrible, and another issue. But, if you believe it and you tell people that, and they see you, and, you really, really embody that, then that is going to be fine. And, as we're exploring careers here, I'm going to be performing till I can't perform anymore. So I'm just going to continue to do it how I can, how I know best, be on my journey, and go on my merry little way. One of the parts about a kind of like performing career, especially a professional performing career, that I really enjoy is playing music with other people. And I've been in a handful of bands and different kinds of groups, and sorry, guitar ensemble does not count. But, being in choir and things like that. And I really love playing music with other people, probably as much as I enjoy playing solo. There's something that's really fun about making music with other people. You're on the same wavelength. You have a vibe, something that both of you all kind of are matching. It's some of the most important music that we, as people who listen to music, know and love, right? It's made by groups of people. There's community there. There's something intentional about it, and it's something that makes it really different and really worth it. And yes, as much as I love playing with people, I do enjoy playing solo. And as a classical guitarist, you are really expected to mostly play solo. It is sad how little emphasis is put on what it means to be a good band member or collaborator in music school for the classical guitarist. It's very bad. In fact, I think there are a lot of classical guitarists who never play with other people, and I think they're really missing out on what is essential to the music making process. And sure, they can do what they want, and yeah, playing solo is great too, but you have to have this ability to be a sole voice and a single communicator, and in that moment when you're playing solo. And some people don't do that as well as they might think that you do. So ultimately, a fulfilling musical career, a fulfilling performance career for me is both playing solo and playing with other people, like in my duo and in any of the other kind of artistic ensemble band things that I do in the future. And I think that you can tell a lot about a person by how they play with other people. So I'm not here to judge people's playing ability, really, but I do think that you can tell if someone is a great communicator or not by how they communicate with others in a band or in a group or in any of those kinds of settings where they're playing with other people. And sure, when you're playing in a band, in a group, it doesn't always go well. Some nights are bad. Sometimes things just don't fall the way that they need to, but there is that potential there. And that's really important too. And in the same way that I envision myself continuing to teach in some way, and like in the first episode of the series, consult in some way, my future and current career looks like some of all of this. It's an artistically fulfilling career that involves many many things. But there's still something more that I'm hoping to explore and to get into when it concerns performing. And I will say that I'm pretty happy with what I've been able to accomplish so far within, this classical guitar-ish music space and everything. I've worked in school and I've done stuff and gone to concerts and festivals and, I've done what they say that you're supposed to do, but I want to play other kinds of music. I want to play other genres and styles of music. And Jamie and I, my duo partner, were talking about, this the other day, and how in other types of art forms and in other, like broad genres, there seems to be less of a barrier and less of an exclusivity when you want to cross over into another style of music. Like people don't make fun of you, or maybe, and of course people have things to say, but we were referring to some authors that we both are really big fans of, and how, one day they're writing a nonfiction book about closing schools in Chicago, and the next day they're writing a middle grade fiction book, and the next day they're writing a book about slavery. And like, I want to be able to just play music and to do that in many genres. So that's something that I'm hoping to explore and do more. And in classical music, this is, of course, just my observation. You're not really supposed to do that. You're actually told not to do that. I remember this was many years ago, but I was telling one of my teachers, like, yeah, I play acoustic guitar sometimes with people, blah, blah, and they were like, no, you are not supposed to do that. And, like, that person lives I'm not going to get into that, but all I have to say is that that's not the way that I believe that it should be. In classical music, it's kind of like you're supposed to play the same music that you were doing when you were 4, until whatever age you are now, and that's supposed to be it. And people will kind of like say things and make fun of you behind your back, and they'll say you're not a really good musician because you couldn't, quote unquote, make it in this genre. And again, I don't really care that much about what other people think. I just want to make art and I want to perform it for people. And yeah, so that's what I want. I want to do more of that. I want to do other styles and types of music. And I've done that in the past. And it's just something that currently it's kind of challenging because, so many things are going on in my life. And it's hard to get to that. But I really do want to start getting back into playing with a band and really diving deep into jazz and playing that and other styles of music. So that's kind of what I really want to explore career-wise, especially in performance. And I don't know exactly what that'll look like, but maybe it looks like I'm a singer-songwriter. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of an Americana thing. It's a little jazz-ish, although I would say probably more jazz than ish. But that's what I want to do, and I just want to be an artist. I want to make art. I want to perform it for people, and I want to be the original maker of the art, and not only the person who plays it. And I think, of course, like me as a performer who plays music that other people compose is a really important part of my art and my practice and my journey. But I want to do some other things, and that stuff's interesting to me, and that is cool. So whenever that stuff does begin to happen, of course, you will be the first to know about it. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about that more and to explore that more from the perspective of a person who has like pretty typical classical music training, and to kind of see where that goes. So that's where I am with my performance career and just general thoughts and ideas around performing. So this is a show about music, like I just talked about, and something for you to listen to this week the music recommendation of the week is Mama by Sarah Jarosz. And I've known about Sarah Jarosz for a while. Of course, she's super popular, and she recently released a new album. And so I was listening to it, and I was just like, "Oh, this is so good! I have to share it with people," which is kind of how those things are. And so, yeah, that's the recommendation. It is going to be linked directly in the show notes, and it's also going to be added to the podcast's Spotify playlist. Don't forget to follow the podcast on social media and the website. We also have a newsletter, which you can subscribe to, where I send updates and some additional stuff about the show. You can also, of course, buy a sticker. They're hot, they're going fast, so grab them while you can. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give the show a rating and review. And you can also give the show a and a rating and review on Podchaser, which is kind of like podcast social media. It's a really cool thing. I'm hanging out there as well, and so you can follow the link in the show notes to leave a review on Podchaser as well. You can support the podcast by buying a coffee or a book using the support the show link in the show notes. So that's all I have for you today. I will be back in 2 weeks with the next episode of the Musically Cogitating Podcast. Until then.